Welcome, friends. My name is Lucas Miley, and I'm joining you from Pendle Hill on Lenape land on what is now known as Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As many of you know, since 1930, Pendle Hill has been an experiment in spiritual learning, in community, and in worship. Hello to our leaders, to our alumni, and to those who are new to us tonight. Before I say a little more about our program tonight, I want to go over a few brief tech aspects. I'm joined tonight by Pendle Hill staff and guests in the barn, including Maddie Rose, Olivia Gamber, and Francis Kramer, assisting with tech. If you have any technical difficulties or questions tonight, please message Pendle Hill Q&A, and they'll do their best to support you. We're especially grateful to Friends Foundation for the Aging, whose support allows us to continue making our first Monday lecture series and our other online offerings free to friends of all ages. A couple notes. You may have noticed that we are live streaming this video to our YouTube channel, Pendle Hill USA. Only those speaking will be live streamed. In the coming days, we will send out a link to the recording along with resources from tonight. We have enabled live transcription, so you are able to access closed captioning. Lastly, at the end of the lecture, we will have the opportunity to share time for Q&A. Friends, every first Monday lecture finds us in its own unique moment, and tonight is no exception. We are continuing a conversation that began almost 95 years ago, and we plan to be here again on the first Monday of January, continuing to turn towards each other in these challenging times, learning how to build the beloved community together. This first Monday lecture is, in many ways, near and dear to my heart. We are blessed to be joined by two friends, leaders, and staff members of Quaker Voluntary Service, sharing on the theme of spirit-led community across generations. As a current QVS Fellow in Philadelphia, it is my pleasure to introduce Rye Carter, who is my Philadelphia coordinator for Quaker Voluntary Service. Rye grew up as a Baptist in Philadelphia. They came into interfaith work in their undergrad years at Ursinus College, studying politics, peace, and social justice, as well as international relations and African American and Africana studies. And since then, Rye has researched eco-theology in the Black community, learning to understand its connections to other faith and spiritual practices. They have also spent time working in racial equity and systems change. Rye is passionate about plants and the natural world, cooking as a healing practice, and understanding community and social systems. They are interested in further exploring the intersection of religion, food, and employment. They also enjoy biking, taking care of their many plants, and listening to podcasts in their time off. I'm also so happy that we'll be joined tonight by Ruth Kutcher. Ruth is the recruiting and marketing coordinator for QVS. She loves to work with young adults as they discern their path from college into the work of transforming the world. Ruth is excited about the impact of QVS in revitalizing Quaker meetings and giving young activists the support and training to be effective change agents. Ruth is a convinced friend and a member of Durango Friends Meeting in Durango, Colorado. She holds a Master of Divinity from Earlham School of Religion. It was while she was working on her Master of Divinity that she had the wonderful fortune to befriend several quick QVS alums who changed the course of her life, When she's not at work, Ruth can be found in her garden, at the local gym, picking up heavy things, or cooking yummy food to share with her friends. We'll settle back into silence now for a moment, and I invite our speakers to break the silence when they feel led.
Thank you, Lucas, for such a wonderful introduction. We are so glad to be with you all and to share just a few notes and ideas about our work here at QVS and what it means to build an intergenerational community. I am Rye, and Ruth, you'll see pinned as well. And as we begin, I want to invite us into just holding some space for the world that we are in right now as we think about this work of intergenerational community. It feels important to acknowledge that there is a catastrophic attempt at ethically cleansing Indigenous folks from Turtle Island in the United States, where 70 million people were killed, and those who survived were largely displaced. This is not dissimilar from the 7.3 million people who've been displaced in Sudan, the 6.1 million people in Congo, and the 2.1 million people in Palestine and Gaza, and 200,000 people in Haiti right now. Even though our global community is not the focus of our time together today, it does feel important to name the impacts of racism, imperialism, and white supremacy culture and how they're having horrific impacts on our Indigenous communities here and our neighbors abroad. When we begin to realize ourselves not separate from the land and not separate from each other, I think that we can have an impact on our understanding of community. I encourage you to think about these two questions. What is your or our faithful next step in engaging with Indigenous communities in which we live? In order for us to learn the technology of community, we must first want to know deeper where and how we are responsible in order to be a more welcoming community. I'll pass it to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Rye. And we're ready for the next slide. Yeah, what is community? So well before COVID entered the scene and caused all of us to stay home and in isolation, scholars had noted that there was a loneliness epidemic. Two age groups were found to be particularly susceptible to isolation and loneliness, and those groups were the elderly and, surprisingly, young adults. This information was followed up by a 2024 poll by the American Psychiatric Association that revealed that 30% of young adults aged 18 to 34 feel lonely every day or several times per week. Loneliness is considered to be a risk factor for many health concerns, including depression, anxiety, and addiction. Additionally, roughly 30% of people aged 50 to 80 also experience loneliness and social isolation. And it's been determined that the health effects of loneliness are similar to the impact of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So one way to address the loneliness epidemic is to find community. And if a person can't find a community around them that is a good fit, having the skills to build a community can help. At QVS, we use the time we have with fellows to teach them frameworks for community building. These frameworks and skills include things like nonviolent communication, structures in our program like QVS days and retreats, and house meetings for business. In our opinion, community care is a Quaker superpower. Quakers have a long history of taking great care of their community members. We have practices and processes that are time-tested and infused with spirit. The community building skills we teach to QVS fellows are steeped in Quaker tradition, and they're also updated to be relevant for young adults. When we present these Quaker practices and traditions to young adults, our hope is not to necessarily have all the answers, but simply to invite young people, young adults, into deeper questions of building community well. And so with that, we'd like to present a definition of community. And I think that there's a little advancy thing in the slide that will make that definition pop up. Yep, just like that. A definition of community that we like to work with is that it's a deliberately assembled group of people who work together for a shared purpose. And when we're talking about that work together as a community, it's important to think about the type of care work we're doing for each other when we're in intentional community. It's this interdependence and that style of labor with each other that makes community building within our QVS framework unique. And next up, we've got Rye.
Absolutely. And so as you think about that particular type of care work, that intentional relational being, We are often invited to think about how do we create a community that people actually want to be a part of. There's so many types of things we're invited into every day, whether that be a committee or our quicker meetings or other activities, and we don't always feel super excited about them. But at QVS, we hope to think about what are the aspects of community that meets the needs that young adults and older friends might want to see in the world. In QVS, we talk about our work of equipping young adults for their whole lives, rooted in spiritual change. This has a double meaning for us. One, we think about their whole being, about recognizing that there isn't a long term, that there is a long term, and that there aren't any quick fixes or drop-in experiences when it comes to learning about being an intentional community. You have to do it in order to be able to experience it. Also, we hold the fact that it's important for folks in community to be their whole selves, being grounded and rooted. As we move through community building, we can begin to think about how we set up our community systems to support a culture of intentional connection. And we do this in a variety of different ways in our program as well as examples, which I'll get to in a moment. White supremacy culture has taught us to move about our life with a sense of urgency, leaving us with little to no time to slow down and realize where we are and what we're doing or evaluate our purpose. White supremacy culture teaches us to value perfectionism over seeing the good that already exists, causing us to slide over the beauty while stressing over every little detail. It is told to us to aim for quantity over quality, making us interested in stretching ourselves thin. Because of white supremacy culture, many of us walk around with a negative well-being, which can lead to that isolation that we were talking about before. Intentional community is a tool to allow ourselves the space to feel and to recognize that and intentionally contradict it. That type of labor of care work invites us into being a little bit closer to each other. What might it mean to be concerned about the health and well-being of the people that we live with? To be able to create corporate finances, to be able to know what is going to be caring and gentle and kind to the people we're connected to. For us, we do this type of intentional community building in a variety of different ways, but specifically through our QVS days and retreats. Those days are dedicated to being present together and doing spiritual work in community. This is built into the structure of our program and is a way to establish a pattern of stepping out of the swirl of everyday life to reflect on our inner lives, relationships with each other, and our relationships with spirit. We prioritize that during those specific times in a variety of different ways. One of those, though, specifically is really having at least 30 to 45 minutes during our QVS days to do worship. And do some spiritual exploration alongside that. We really are excited about the fact that we can turn to our traditional ways of engaging with Quakerism in sitting in silent worship. We can also think about worship sharing or other tools to be able to invite fellows to think further into their relationship to spirit. Having time away and really holding our space for retreat is also really, really useful. It allows that connection that I just described of not just thinking about this pattern for the 9.5 months that fellows are with us, but also to build that pattern for their lives. What could it look like to spend 3 days every couple of months over the next decade? And to be able to commit that time to thinking about these ideas. Yeah, next slide.
So what does it mean when we use the term spirit-led? I'm going to give a few examples of what we're talking about when we're using that term. one way that we do spiritual work is when we are working to tap into feelings of abundance or gratitude. And some examples of how that shows up in QVS is our QVS days and having abundant time to be together. We, as Ryan mentioned, we invite worship and check-in practices that allow for worship sharing in different ways. Another spiritual practice is in recognizing the abundance that can be found in community and letting go of the stress of scarcity. One example is when fellows ask the local support committee for support and thereby allow the community to help them solve problems rather than using money to solve problems. This is a way that fellows can experience how community can be a shared resource to find what we need, and it also stresses our interdependence. Another example of experiencing abundance is how we have a shared resource of the house food budget. This is a way in which we don't prioritize the individuality of having money for food resource, but encouraging fellows to learn how to cooperate and work together on the shared resource and feeling the abundance of sharing that. And then we use this phrase, moving at the speed of trust. This is another way that spirit shows up. It takes time to build trust in a household of strangers, and taking chances with strangers and being vulnerable in our relationships is the way that we make deep connections. And this can be really challenging. We teach tools and frameworks such as Brené Brown's Braving framework to think about how to build trust and have fellows share aloud so they have a better understanding of how to build deep relationships with each other, or to repair trust using relational bids. And we're ready for the next slide.
So there's a couple of ways of thinking about looking at community. And at a high level, I'm going to describe some ways in which we think about fractals, how we organize our systems, how we create a shared sense of values, an organization around our relationships, and where vulnerability plays into all of this. I want to name that typically we do a lot of back and forth when describing these pieces to give people better and clearer examples of how all of these pieces go together. We're going to try to hope that this is clear, and feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about fractals. What is a fractal? For us, it's something that is the same on all levels. This means that the smallest version of it reflects when it is made large. When we're thinking about our intentional communities, we hope that we can practice on the small. So for example, in our QVS houses, 6 to 8 fellows, we're able to have them try on the parts of how we want the world to be, what types of skills we might want to invite larger communities into, and what it might take to do that, so that we know the scale of that transition can look like in the large. We need to be transformed in order to transform the world. It is the same set of skills and behaviors, whether that's in a group of 6 or in a groups of thousands. Some questions that we think about in relationship to this, to make it a little bit more real, is potentially even starting at the larger level. What is a social change issue that you care deeply about? What do you wish the world would do and what it would look like? What do we need to practice at the small level to make that possible? How do we make that accessible to each other? And how do we practice that transformation that we need in order to have that exist? So what does that look like to you to do on the smallest level? What are the values we might need? What is the vulnerability required? What are the relationships that we need to have? And what systems do we need to organize? A lot of the times, I think in our experience with fellows, we recognize that a lot of this is small, what might feel like smaller internal work. But I think our larger social justice systems don't always take the time to have people process what those small shifts look like. That might be, as we've described before, those small ways that we might communicate with each other, how we are patient, how we prioritize building relationship in a particular way, how we invite each other to take care, what we're naming to each other and what we need. Those are the small transformational shifts that when we practice them in our QBS communities, they better are able to reflect and connect to these larger systems we hope to see. In our QBS program, we have a little bit of a joke that goats make goats, which essentially means that we are creating what we are. When we are able to live into that transformation, we're actually being the community that we want to see. When we have a goat, we make a goat. When we think about values, there is an important way of being able to name those values out loud. Each community has different values. If you think about it in a larger context, there are communities such as eco-villages that are really organized around their climate work. There are communities that are really focused on the change that they can see in a particular community. It is okay that all of our communities have different values, but it's important to be able to name them and be clear about them and think about how we want to go about actually engaging in those values. For many of our fellows, but also for all of us, our families are our first experiences in intentional community. Think, for example, when you might have been a young person going to a different person's house and you realized for the first time that maybe they ran the dishwasher a little differently, or who sat at the front of the table was different than how your family did it. Each one of our QBS houses will find different things that work, and that's okay. We encourage them to live into that difference. We encourage our fellows to think about the fact that every single person is coming from a different perspective. It's really important that we think about not assuming that people share the same values as we do, even if we come to the same project together. Just because we might have different values doesn't mean that they're wrong. If I had a beautiful sheet of sticky note paper, one of my staples, I would draw a lot of different lines of different colors. And our QBS experience, or really the moment of creation of any community, is that moment of intersection. There's one particular place where we're all coming together for a specific project. And how wonderful that is. But while we're so focused on the excitement of that one particular moment, how do we also hold and recognize all of the places where people have been or will go at the before and after their experience in intentional community together? And that plays a large role in some of these decisions that communities can make. I want to hold a really specific moment for a value that is really essential as well, which is that community is love. Focusing on community and relationships is inherently anti-capitalist. Justice lives in the ways that we take care of each other, and not just in the ways that we highlight our differences and label the good and the bad in the ways that people have been taught to live. It has become a radical act to stay in community with people we have conflict with. And this framework gives us an opportunity to sit in the discomfort of conflict, because that is where we learn about our differences and where they come from. It's not just, it feels different to be able to hold that it's okay. And I don't really know how to describe it all the way, but the words that I will use is when we're comfortable with allowing people to be themselves. When we're comfortable with saying, wow, you show up differently, and that's okay. It's okay that you might not have the same experiences that I do, that you've come to this project of being in community in the same way. But what can it look like to allow you to be as you are and find the place where we can be comfortable together? Social justice living is an alternative. It's an investment in people. These lessons allow us to take social justice from the micro level into the macro and offer a framework for social change that might actually work. Social justice is at the core of community building, and personal reflection, and individual transformation. It can be really hard to reckon with our values of really wanting everyone to be present at the table. If we actually want that and we believe in it, then that means we have some inner work of transformation to do when we are in conflict with someone. We have to reckon with the uncomfortability that in that moment, our relationship is not jiving, right? We have to trust that if we believe in the value that everyone belongs, what can it look like to find those places? I'm saying we can be in community together. And of course, that's like a deep simplification in some ways, and it can really lead to a lot of learning and deepening and strengthening together. We must be aware of how our privileges and histories can be complicit in the status quo, and that we can act as resistors. To be honest, community isn't real in a super tangible way in some ways. It doesn't just live in the middle. It's the culmination of all of our individual connections. You'll see in this center photo, an activity that we often do with our fellows around our mid-year, sometimes at the end of their year, that recognizes that our relationships with each other, our community isn't just a circle of all of the people who might gather. It is the strength, the tension, the challenges, the joys, each of the individual relationships that each person in that group has. The work that we put into those individual relationships can strengthen, change, transform our communities. And a lot of the work that we do in QVS is being able to prioritize, process, and build language, tools, and skills around those individual relationships to scale up into something that makes a lot of these social justice values and systems a bit more tangible. I will pass it to you, Ruth.
Thank you. And we're ready for the next slide. So building community is like learning a new language or learning to play a musical instrument. At first, when you're learning these new skills, you have to do something that doesn't feel natural. So you have to pass through an artificial stage in order to create something new. I think of that phrase, fake it till you make it. So you use the new skill, even though it feels awkward, until you've used it long enough that it does start to feel natural. The founder and former director of L'Arche in Atlanta used to share the story that in his experience of intentional community building, when complaining started, it usually meant there was a lack of intimacy and celebration. And we carry this story into our work with our fellows when we encourage them to do the hard work of actually getting to know each other, also known as intimacy, and also to have fun together. It's easy to get trapped in this idea that it's always work, 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 but truly a lot of the relationship building, the really important relationship building, happens when we're having fun. And I would like to say that QVS is it's an immersion program in the language of community. And I'll pass it back to Rai.
Thank you. Next slide, please. When we think about our work of intentional communities, it also feels important to think about our histories as well. Sort of shifting gears a little bit, question that we often think about is, what are the moments in history where the religious society of friends has changed? Whether it's thinking about community, thinking about our spiritual tradition, what are some parts of that culture that needed to shift for the times? Why? When we think about our our time with our fellows and building intentional communities as well. A question that we think about is, what are you willing to change about the culture for its most vital and important roots to actually be able to show and live beyond this moment? If we have the values, if we're wanting to hold the values that we want to see, we might have to live into that transformation to let those roots really have the space that they need. And that might be paring away at some of the things that maybe don't work for us anymore. For us, sustainable Quakerism and sustainable communities are willing to move and change and meet the needs of the community. For us, we do this in a variety of different ways. One of the particular things that comes up for us is recognizing that our whole structure of QVS, just almost every year, we take in a lot of feedback from our fellows about their experience, about the cultural world that we're living in, about what they want to see around their social justice work, around their time to rest, to think about spirituality, and we shift alongside that. We think about how we can hold the roots of the work that we want to see at the communities that we want to build, and recognize the places we can grow and change along the way. This can also be true in the ever-changing turning of building and community as well. A lot of communities might start off with a set of systems and they really want to hold on to them. That in our houses can look like the way that we do the dishes, the way that we organize the chores. You can be really tied to the way that that shows up because we put in a lot of work and energy in it the first time. I mean, it feels really scary to shift it once you've had that investment. And it's okay to let it go if it doesn't work. And that's often true in our relationship to our histories as well. In our QVS framework, our fellows connect with the stream of Quaker history as well through their relationships with their spiritual nurturers. Typically, this is an intergenerational relationship that's embedded in our practice as well. Spiritual nurturers often have lived experiences and have experienced many of the life passages that our fellows are navigating. They are steeped as well into knowing what the QVS experience is like, so they have a sense of what fellows might be going through. Within this context of the one-to-one relationship, spiritual nurturers can interpret Quaker experiences and practices for the fellow. In return, can also hear and learn about how young people are engaging in Quakerism for now. Is it meeting their needs? Are there ways that our meetings can change to meet those as well? It can also be helpful during the time of in building a community to know that someone's just holding your experience in the light. Just knowing that someone is really holding and caring for your spiritual well-being as you engage in a really challenging and hard thing. I'll pass it to you, Ruth. Next slide.
Thanks, Ray. So because of the time commitment involved in the QVS experience, we're together with fellows for 9.5 months. We have to go beyond welcoming and take some time to go deeper with questions about belonging. So we're continually asking, as many meetings are also asking, how do we create an environment where people want to stay? How do we create a spiritual community that feels like home? How do we invite newcomers and young people into co-creation and being a part of the evolution of our organization or the evolution of Friends? One of our staff members, Zenaida Peterson, helped to think about how we build more welcoming communities in Quaker spaces through reflecting on how we can engage in anti-racism work. And I'll share a link to their work at the end of our time together. And I'll pass it back to you, Rai.
Next slide, please. Another key aspect of building and community is letting go, thinking about fear, and holding space for our vulnerability. When we're thinking about our intergenerational communities, we know that they also need the space for transformation. Transformation is a Quaker value, and it can be hard to really hold what that could mean. Quakers have this technology of transformation, and that can also mean looking for the spiritual gifts that people have to bring in community. Alongside that, there's a lot of fear that can show up when we think about what community can look like. Are there things that we might need to let go of? How do we hold space for the stories that we have about that fear? Are you willing to let go of certain structures in your community in order that might maintain a sense of order that might not be serving you any longer? These are hard conversations that we might have with fellows as they journey together. When we come to moments when tension might be really high or things are really frustrating, sometimes we seek to think that it's the relationships that might be the challenge, but it also might be those structures. It also might be the stories of the fears that we have that really limit our ability to see into the values that really hold our community together. Chatting about those can help release some of that tension and put us closer into transformation as well. I will pass it back to you, Ruth, and next slide, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce a framework that we teach our fellows to help them understand the stages that they'll go through in building their community within their house. This comes from the work of M. Scott Peck. And this isn't necessarily a perfect framework, but it at least gets the conversation started about what stages might look like. So the first stage is pseudo community. And oh yeah. So forming, storming, norming, and transforming are the ways that social psychologists look at these 4 stages. And I think if the next little advancy thing happens, you'll see the 4 stages that I'm going to tell you about, which are pseudo community, chaos, emptiness, and community. And these sort of match up, right? Like pseudo community is a lot like forming. So pseudo community, all of these stages actually are unconscious processes, but specifically pseudo community, we just do this sort of reflexively. When we meet new people, we're kind of on our best behavior. Where it's like a honeymoon period. Everything seems peaceful. It also seems a little boring because it's missing the authentic community of sharing, some of our spicier bits. When we're in pseudo community, we're very pleasant. We avoid all disagreement. We're very polite. We don't want to rock the boat, and we would avoid conflict rather than deal with it. We would rather not say anything offensive. And if you happen to hear something offensive, ignore it, pretend it didn't happen. So it's important to be aware of instant community. It's most likely pseudo community. Real community takes time, sacrifice, and effort. So the next stage in community building is chaos. This is when people start acting a little bit more real with each other. The masks come off. In this phase, it can be very unpleasant. Group members might attack each other or their leader. They're trying to find fault. They're noticing like this tension between members of the group, and they're trying to find fault with anyone except themselves. So they're competing ideas about the problems and the fixes. And in chaos, some people find their voices and speak up for themselves. Other folks are uncomfortable with this vulnerability and try to fix other people. Individual differences are now out in the open, and the goal of the group is to heal everyone so they can be normal. Unlike the productive and enlivening fighting of established functioning communities in that fourth stage, in the community stage, in the chaos stage, there's conflict, but it's unproductive. It's noisy. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not fun conflict where you're learning things. It's just conflict where people are kind of tearing each other down. This phase doesn't go away easily, and the group has to commit to putting in effort and work to move out of chaos. Emptiness is, so there are a bunch of different ways out of chaos. One unfortunate way out of chaos is to quit the group. Sometimes people do that. There are other ways out, but the way out of chaos that is conducive to building community is emptiness. And emptiness is where people have decided to transition from rugged individualism to soft individualism. They've decided to break down barriers to communication, to share feelings, to question assumptions, motives, ideology. They're letting go of expectations and preconceptions, or maybe questioning them. They're letting go of prejudice. They're putting down egoic desires to control, heal, convert, fix, or solve. Emptiness asks, what is real underneath all of the noise of chaos? And then the final stage of community building is when people are working together as a functioning community. People can show up as their full, authentic selves. People are able to work together. They might move forward. They might get a little stuck. Then they know how to work together to get unstuck. They can do all of this while being real, but they can be vulnerable with each other and authentic. There's no shame or blame in when people are working from this stage. So in the stage of community, people speak only from their experience. They listen to each person's message without judgment, shame, blame, or agendas, and they don't engage in crosstalk. So we recognize that this model is, there's like a lot more complexity to it than we're just marching through the stages, but offering the model as a way to talk through potential stages does lead to a lot of really good conversations, and helps people understand how they're growing and changing as they grow into a community. And I will pass it back to Rai.
And next slide, please. And maybe you can click one more time. So we have a lot of frameworks for our community, for how one can build community, especially intergenerationally. I think similarly for us, we do this work centering young adults because you have to start somewhere, right? And almost everything that we use, whether that's the tools, the conversations, the questions, the experiences that we have, can be used for how to build intergenerational communities as well. Some of those are really the types of conversations that we have, the types of practices that we do, the things that we're really clearly interrupting, whether that be our time thinking about our anti-racism trainings, being able to engage our local support committees and spiritual nurturers, using practices of retreats and QBS days, a sense of shared decision-making. When I think of our 4 stages of community and nonviolent communication, those are tools that are really created around building shared language. And sometimes really unique to each individual group. And there are so many others. And when I have thought about the intergenerational communities that I have built over the past now 6 years, which is pretty wild, a lot of them have many of these aspects. A lot of them have really pushed to think about what transformation looks like to really think about what they can let go of, thinking about fear, vulnerability, so many of the aspects that we've talked about. And a lot of our communities, when we think of kind of circling all the way back, when we think about that isolation that we were talking about at the beginning, have kind of just gotten lost in that stagnation. Of maybe not engaging in thinking about that shared language or what transformation is, or letting go, or naming that fear that's within all of us. And so we hope that we can use many of those tools, whether that be in our meetings, if you do engage with our QBS program, or in other communities, to be able to build them in a way that invites many different types of generations in. I'll pass it to you, Ruth.
Thanks. I'm ready for the next slide. Yeah, exactly. So before concluding our talk, I just wanted to give a little overview of some things that are going on at QVS, and also just to kind of remind folks of what we are and what we're growing into. So we are a 9.5-month program for young adults aged 21 to 30, and we're located in 4 different cities: Boston, Philly, the Twin Cities, and Portland, Oregon. New in 2025, we're starting a 5-week summer program led by Rye for young adults aged 18 to 20, and that will be in Philly. I really feel like it's super important to express gratitude to all of the people who make QVS possible, and in particular, our local support committees, our amazingly dedicated friends in each of our cities who help us in so many ways. And yeah, I just feel like I can't express enough gratitude for all the ways they help keep us going. Just like every nonprofit right now, we are doing our end of year fundraising appeal, and we do rely on the generous support of donors, volunteers, Quaker meetings, and Quaker organizations. So please keep that in mind as you're planning your end of year giving. We will be doing a supporters briefing on December 12th from 7:30 to 9. And that the main purpose of that briefing is to let folks know more about the summer program. But that would be another place to go if you had questions about QVS or wanted to know more. And I think I might be able to find a link for that to drop in the chat if folks are interested in the supporters briefing. And that is, I believe that's the end of our presentation. Yes, we're going to go back into silence. And then at some point we'll come out of silence for the Q&A portion of our program.
Thank you so much, Ryan, Ruth. So friends, for friends in the room, please write your questions on an index card and someone will collect them. For friends online, as you are led, please feel free to write questions and send them to Q&A. We invite you to share questions that will clarify what you've heard or questions that seek to learn more about something that has been shared. We hope that this evening will be part of a continuing conversation with QVS. And as we wait for questions, for friends to think of questions, write them in, send them in, I can get the ball rolling and ask you both a question. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to be participating in QVS for the last number of months and learning about a lot of these frameworks and tools and practices about community that you've shared with our group today. And I'm curious if there's one technique or tool or practice in QVS communities that you think is really special, and that you just wish would be in all communities practiced by everyone in the world. If you could just sort of pick one thing one learning from QVS that you would love to see in communities in the wider world.
Oh boy, just one. Ooh, I think one that feels really meaningful to me is a particular practice that we use called heart-centered listening. And in that one, it is an opportunity for actually 3 folks to sit together. One person as the holder, one person as the speaker, one person as the listener. And I think it embodies so many of the aspects of what we hope for. Our our values, the structures, the experiences that we want folks to have. It encourages us to slow down, for one, really slow down. That activity is almost 15-20 minutes a piece. So it takes a long time to have everyone share, but it's so important. You can prioritize really hearing and sharing back with each other about what we understand and have an opportunity to change the story we need to, your listener, to know that someone's holding that experience and wanting everyone to get what they need out of being present with each other feels so gentle. And it's something that I think isn't always reflected in our everyday lives. We're so used to back and forth, 2 people, maybe one, just giving for stories. And so that's the one that comes up for me.
I'm a big fan of nonviolent communication. I know that it can be problematic, but if a person is using it authentically, it can be a very transformative practice. It's one of those things that sort of like the 4 stages of community, we put it in one little slide and there's this idea you can learn it in 5 minutes, but it really takes like a couple of decades, I think, to learn it, or maybe forever. But it's an amazing practice. That's my favorite.
Thank you so much.
We have a question in the barn. And hello, folks. My name is Maddie Rose. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an education coordinator education program coordinator here at Pendle Hill, and I'm also a Quaker Voluntary Service alum. I served in Portland, Oregon. Big fan. Really enjoyed this conversation. One of the questions we have in the barn here, someone is hoping you could talk a little bit more about the 9.5 month program in Philadelphia, so the Quaker Voluntary Service year, as well as the summer program in Philadelphia for the end.
Sure. So yes, we have what I would call our year-long program, even though it's 9.5 months. It spans more of the year in many different seasons, which is for young adults ages 21 to 30 who are interested in thinking about spirituality, intentional community, and service. So at a really high level, that means that Those young adults live together in-house. They engage in some really clear practices, like these are the frameworks that we offer to them around some of the things we talked about today. So some of those structures looks like house meeting, at least once a week, house worship at least once a week, some version of house meals together, and going to figure meeting. Another key part of that structure that's related to service is being able to be at social justice organizations such as Pendle Hill, who is serving as a site placement this year, and many others that allow fellows to think about their relationship and frameworks and social justice in a unique way. And the third key part of that program is thinking about spirituality. So our hope is that, of course, as I said before, that they will be engaged in our spiritual nurture program, be interested in at least attending and exploring and experiencing Quaker values, traditions, and histories by going to meetings, and also doing that within their home as well. So those are some of the structures of that. There's a lot more, I could say. We have our QBS days, that are bi-weekly, that help support a lot of the pieces that we talked about today, such as learning that type of shared language, being able to think about those values, relationships, etc. And we also have those retreats, as I talked about as well. So there's 3 of those. So you have a fall retreat, a mid-year, and an end-of-year retreat. We also currently have recovery days, so time in between being able to come back to work to really process and engage all of the learning that we've done together over that time. We have our national orientation, which is also hosted at Pendle Hill, an incredible experience to really ground fellows in the work that they're about to do. And also be connected to their larger community as well. What is the learning and growing that they want to see in themselves? That can connect to community. Again, I think so much of the work at QVS is an intentional experiment in self-learning and self-transformation, and then finding its relationship to other people. The thing that we can build together when that transformation builds alongside each other. Our 5-week program that will be in Philly is so exciting. I can't believe that it'll be launching next year. That program is for young adults ages 18 to 20 who are really interested in the same aspects and want to be able to do it in a much shorter time frame. So in that particular experience, those young adults will be joining us online for 5 sessions to really build and co-create the world that they want to see. What is the experience they want to have? What do they feel is meaningful for this moment? As we all might feel, trying to meet this moment and knowing what we need, incredibly difficult. But what would it look like for the adults, formal adults that we are, to trust young people with what their learning can look like? What if we didn't dictate that for them? And so in this model, we have a menu of options that they get to take a look at, make some decisions about, and actually plug those into what those 5 weeks looks like. It's a program by young people for young people. So we as staff are facilitating holding the experience of that for them, but they get to choose if they want to prioritize 5 site placement visits, for example, that are all oriented around mutual aid, or if they want to be able to split those up and also think about agriculture and also think about houselessness. There's a lot of options for them in that exploring. And so we're so excited to know that there's so many young people that are really interested in facilitating their own learning with the support of our program. So there's more to come on our website and things that will be showing up soon as we get the application out in the coming days and weeks. But I'm really, really excited.
Great, thank you. I would remind and invite our folks online joining via Zoom that if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it. Well, we have another one here. What are some of the unique challenges to building community in this moment? And what are some of the unique opportunities?
I can start and then you can go over if you want. Honestly, when I think about it, our collective stress is really high. And that actually really affects our ability to have some spaciousness for a lot of these processes of building community to work well. We have like less ability sometimes to be able to see each other, to be able to allow that to come into being, to not become elevated as quickly because they just have less bandwidth. Which is hard and okay, like hard and important to like recognize and hold that like we're already holding so much. The project of community is also a lot to hold. How do we build in on the front end? That not everything has to be an emergency when it comes to building together. That we can actually prioritize the fun, the care, the joy, the relaxation, the deep breaths that we might not take in other places and other ways that we're engaged. And so I really think that's the opportunity to turn away from the intensity sometimes of the times that we have and turn towards really building, engaging the things that are missing in the outside world. Yeah.
That's a tough one to follow. I think some of the challenges that we have in community building in this moment come from COVID and where people were developmentally when 2020 intersected with their life. We're seeing people now who were starting college in 2020. That's going to look different when it's somebody who was in high school or younger. So like this is a mark that's been made on people's lives that we'll continue to see as long as we're doing this work. And I feel like it left a mark on people's lives because, we were all alone and didn't have a chance to work through the developmental things that needed to happen during those years, because it wasn't just a matter of months. For some people, they were isolated for very long, for a couple of years. I think also technology, we're looking at folks who've grown up with a smartphone in their hands from the time they were a toddler. A person who's had their every entertainment need satisfied by a device approaches community in a different way. And like some community building is not exactly entertaining or fun. It can be fun. We're trying to make it fun. But it can be challenging. And if somebody has been accustomed to things not being challenging, that's something to get used to. So those are huge challenges that I'm not articulating very well, but I think people are writing books about these challenges. The opportunity that we have right now is young adults are very interested and determined to be involved in solving the problems that our world faces. People are leaving college really wanting to make a difference and really wanting, like, the problems are just so apparent that there's a sense of urgency and drive to do the hard work. And I do believe that the people who are attracted to a program like QVS understand that they've missed out on some things because of COVID and because of maybe an overdependence on technology, and are very willing to pick up this hard work. So I think we're doing a good job of finding the really lovely people who are saying like, I think I need to put my phone down for a while and learn about the people around me. So I see that as an opportunity.
And I think one last one is is something that I hope that we highlighted today, which is the transformation of our communities. I think that is a really unique opportunity as well, to know that it's hard and okay, but maybe what we have been building isn't meeting this moment. And we can shift and change as well.
We have another question. What can older folks learn from the PBS experience about how to build intergenerational community with young people?
Good question. Um. I think some of the queries that we offered are things that I think young adults also want to know, that folks who like might have lived in have different experiences from them, right? Like are also thinking about what is the story that older folks might have about that, the fears that they have about a changing tradition, about a changing world. We were at our all staff retreat, and what I love about PBS is that our staff community is a reflection of the communities that we want to build. Like we are actively practicing it as well, which I think keeps us going too. And it's a lot of work to do both, to like help build and also lead. But we were together during the election, and we were sitting in worship sharing, and Mike Huber, our director of programs, was like sitting next to me. I was having a really hard time, but his sharing was chatting about like the last time he remembered the fear that he had around the election. And for him, that was different election, maybe, I don't, like 30 or 40 years prior. And invited it like that sharing that brought personally me a lot of ease, to know that there is something in that sharing, that's something that's in that relationship, to know that like his sharing of his fear meant that I could share mine, just across many generations, across many different experiences. And I think there, in the I perspective, I think I've sometimes encountered folks from older generations that like feel the resistance to that vulnerability, like might want to like show up as like stoic and all-knowing, and there's something about breaking that. For us, that it's like our LSC relationships and our spiritual nurture relationships, to bring people a little closer. But our age just seems, again, as you talked about before, that we've had different experiences that we can have, but we have so much that we can learn together. That it's okay to have heartbreak in the places where we're not sure, and we can do that together. And so I think that's like one key place where I think that there's a lot to learn in those intergenerational relationships.
Thank you. We have a question online. A person says, thanks for sharing about the power of continuing revelation experienced through the program. What are some of the biggest shifts PBS has made over the last few years based on continuing revelation?
Can you repeat the second half of that question? I'm sorry. What are some of the changes?
Yep, what are some of the biggest shifts PBS has made over the last few years based on continuing revelation?
I'm gonna take a moment to hold that one. I think that, KBS holds the space for continuing revelation by inviting fellows into being in relationship again and again and again. As we shared a little bit before, it can be really easy to be engaged in a sense of disposability of our relationships, of people, of our communities, and we feel like we're done. And that feeling is okay. I think there's so much in our work of saying it's not necessary to make a values judgment about how people are experiencing a thing. And it feels so exciting to encourage people to try again. And do it differently. It's not to say we have to do it the same way, but what can we shift to do it differently? I think for us is the center of what continuing revelation looks like in the program. Can we show up to that conversation differently? Can we take a deep breath differently? Can we move our bodies in a different way that better meets what we need and what our relationships need and what our communities need? And that we might be out of practice and it might not look great the first time. But I guess in this moment I'm having this really embodied experience of that because it's so that's a really simple set of words, but the body part of that is actually really hard. It brings up a lot of emotion to be like, wow, I already put in so much into this relationship, into trying this thing. And can I invite myself to try again and do it differently? It just has, I don't know, when I think about it, it just holds so much to the depth of, again, what that care can look like that we started off with. That care that's just so deep and enduring. That doesn't have to be, it's a choice that we make. It's a choice to be in that type of ongoing relationship. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
We have a question about kind of the structure of Quaker voluntary service. They're asking, how many people are housed in each of the 4 programs? Is a coordinator living in the house? And do the recruits typically come from the 4 urban sites?
Where's do you want to take this one?
Sure. So our model when QVS was started was that each house would have 6 to 8 fellows in it. And we sometimes reach that number in these post-COVID times. However, our population is typically smaller than that. So we've got, we've had houses with 2 to 3 people in them, which is not ideal. It's doesn't feel as much like a community as we would like it to. Your question about does the site coordinator or city coordinator live in the house? The answer to that is no. We want our fellows to feel like they are living on their own, that they have the support of their city coordinator. The coordinator is available when they need support, but is not living in the house, is not policing their behavior or so yeah, they're living on their own without the city coordinator in the house. And I hope, is that the whole question? I think I'm missing one section of the question.
Yep, a question of whether folks tend to join a house near, they're already living near there, or if they are traveling to a new city.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So we've been trying to follow trends with young adults, and it did seem for a moment after COVID that people wanted to stay close to home. And that is somewhat true. However, a lot of the people who are drawn to do QVS are a little more adventurous and are willing to, like I think most of our Portland house are people who are like, I've never been to the West Coast. I'll live in Portland for a year. So, it's not always people from the immediate area who are recruited into that area. A lot of the colleges that we recruit from have a very diverse student body that has come from all over to study at that school. So they're already kind of primed to be open to relocating. So yeah, I think it's a somewhat unusual experience for somebody to have been like born and raised in an area and then they're doing QVS in that same city. Yeah, am I getting that right, Rye? I've only been at QVS for about 2 years, so it's hard for me to say like over the great span of QVS time, it's been this way. But for the last couple of years, it seems like we've populated our houses with people from all over.
Yeah, we have many international fellows that are from different states. I think what's exciting is to know that like we have enough options for young adults to choose what their next step might look like. Whether that's just for a year or to help them settle into their next phase after they finish the program.
I can corroborate that I was in the Portland house and lived most of my life in Pennsylvania and wanted an exploration on the West Coast, so that was true for me and a lot of the folks at my house as well. I think we have time, we have another kind of logistics question and then another kind of big picture question and then maybe cooking at time. This next question is, there's a curiosity about if there is a cost to live in the Quaker Voluntary Service houses.
There is no cost to live in the Quaker Voluntary Service House. This is a unique and intentional experience for folks who want to engage in the hard work. I think so much of what our program is trying to do is to release the barriers. The barriers to doing this type of work can be so high. And a lot of other experiences that can, look like needing to have a full-time job that pays a certain amount to be able to pay rent and utilities, to potentially like choose one of these cities that we're living in, like that we currently have the program in, is really expensive. And our hope is to really ground fellows in saying like, this is a way you can try living in community together, to make it a lot easier to do. And if you have that foundation of knowing that it could work, or that you have more tools to do it, that can really change what your life might look like after this. So it's definitely an experiment. We really appreciate the donations and energy and time and commitment that our donors and our local support committee members, our spiritual nurturers, definitely our staff put in to making this experience possible. To now over the 200 young adults that have done this program over the years. It can get really to me when I hear back and during our alumni reunions about how much QVS continues to frame their experience, maybe not necessarily that they are living in a contentional community right now, but that those questions still linger in them, that they still hold them and think about them with the people that are around them, that they still use the tools, even if they don't remember the names of them, just to hear when I see them 3 or 4 years later talk about their lives, like, oh, I see a little inkling of this thing that we did together. And that I think really changes and builds the world that we hope to see.
I agree, and since I have a mic, I'll also say I'm on the Quaker Voluntary Service Alumni Council, and I think definitely plus one to that, specifically the Enneagram. I encourage you to look it up if you're interested. It's been a tool that I have used in many fellows. I think we probably have time for one more question, which is again back to the theme of community. There's a question, What needs to happen for a community culture to shift from an old established way that's not necessarily working to a new way?
Can you read it one more time? I just want to make sure.
For sure. What needs to happen for a community culture to shift from an old established way that's not necessarily working to a new way?
Great question. I don't know if people are gonna love my answer to this question, but it does depend. I think of, a specific part of the stages of the community, which is when when people are getting tired, right when they get to the end of the chaos phase, for example, and they're just like, wow, like we keep trying to keep the thing that's not working. And at some point it's like it's this little like light bulb moment, like that I think when people are talking about stories of their grand experience, they might miss actually saying that aloud. But I think as when I'm facilitating these conversations, I like notice it, like, oh wait, that's it. But it's a collective light bulb moment of saying, like, oh yeah, wait, actually, it's this system that doesn't work. And it's not always like, the biggest part of the conversation. It can go kind of passing through the night during a house meeting or in one of those like one-on-one conversations. Sometimes they're also not very big. It's a collection of small changes. It's changing what time your house meeting is, and actually if there's a snack, and if people have tea, and you do a collective stretch, and you laugh at the beginning and at the end, and you like make sure you give hugs. Like, right, there's all of these little things. It's not necessarily always this like we have one big change that we need to make. And I think part of that is that sense of responsiveness too. Right, like when we are responsive to like really holding what people are bringing in, to balance like what is our agenda and what do we need right now? What do our bodies, our spirits, our hearts need? How can we best use our 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour together to feel more connected? Those are the shifts. And so it's not a perfect answer, but I do think that like when people slow down and notice with each other where like our bodies and our systems, like our nervous systems are, those shifts sort of come. And it takes some practice too. My last little note is we have this really interesting reading called The Dance, and it talks about like catching the rhythm. First, you have to be able to listen to the rhythm, and then catch it, and then try to practice it. And so much of that is like really like being in tune. Something to be like, I heard it. But it's another thing to like be like, whoa, like what is that? Like what is our flow? What is our rhythm to being together? And I think that makes it a lot easier for communities to notice what those little changes or larger changes need to be.
Thank you again so much, Ryan, Ruth, and thank you to our friends on Zoom and our friends in the barn, and thank you to Pendle Hill staff for supporting our tech. Thank you everyone for joining our experiment in spiritual learning community tonight. The recording of this event and other Pendle Hill offerings will be available on our YouTube channel, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. You can see more about all of our programs, including retreats and celebrations around New Year's at pendlehill.org/learn. And I'll lastly mention that you'll receive an email in the coming week with a link to the transcript, recording, and upcoming opportunities to continue learning with Pendle Hill. You can always find out more at pendlehill.org/learn. We'll now close with just a very brief minute of silence to say goodbye.